Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Hold a Meeting That Achieves Results. My name is Mamie Kanfer Stewart. I am the founder and CEO of Meeteor. And we at Meeteor are on a mission to help people solve the problem of unproductive meetings. And we do this by providing software that helps people plan a thoughtful agenda, take clear notes, and manage effective follow-through, and services like this webinar, workshops, and others. We're so glad that you are joining us today, and let's get started. So as you likely know, meetings are everywhere in our organizations, and research shows that about 1/3 of all meetings are considered unproductive. But what does that really mean? Well, I've spoken to hundreds of people about their meetings, and what I typically hear are the following. Why are we having this meeting? People don't even know why they've gathered to begin with or what this meeting is really supposed to accomplish. We didn't really need this meeting. This meeting could have just been replaced with an email or some other kind of communication. Why did we have to get together in person for this? Why am I personally at this meeting? Maybe this is an important meeting to have, but why am I here? What am I supposed to be contributing? Because it doesn't really feel like it's the best use of my time. Or this was a really interesting conversation, but what did we ultimately decide to do? Kind of when we all walk out the door, what's the next step? What did we agree to? And if you don't have a good outcome, then it's kind of like, well, was that meeting really a good use of our time? So today, we are going to talk about how to have productive meetings. And this is our high-level agenda for the next hour or so. First is we're going to go over 6 steps to determine what your meeting is going to be about, or the 6 reasons why you might have a meeting, and the desired outcome that accompanies those. So you know exactly what you're going to achieve in your meeting. We'll talk through an example of building an effective agenda so that it's more than just a list of topics to cover. We will go through some tips for facilitating the meeting so that you accomplish your desired outcome. And lastly, we'll talk through how to implement these new techniques and practices in your workplace. And once we've gone through all of this, please stick around. We're going to do a demo of the Meeteor software and show you how everything we've talked about is embedded in our software and can help you apply these practices more easily. So let's get started. First question is, why are you having a meeting? So there are 6 different reasons or buckets why you might need a meeting. So we'll walk through each of these individually. The first is to make a decision. You gather people together because they are something that they all have to agree to. Clear enough. The second is alignment. This is not the same thing as information sharing. Alignment is when there's complex information and you need a lot of moving pieces, and you need people to come together and in real time be communicating with each other to achieve some shared understanding where they're collectively making sense of the information, or they're informing each other in a mutually beneficial way, not just one-way communication of information sharing. That's really critical to recognize that nuance between alignment and information sharing. The next step is ideate. These are ideas where you're brainstorming or problem solving, where you're coming up with ideas. Next, we have produce. And these are meetings where you're actually working on some materials together. You could think about it as like a working session or workshopping something. Another way to think about it is an enrichment meeting where you maybe have some materials that you're enhancing together. So you're moving those materials forward by inputting your thinking. Next up is plan. And this is when you're not doing the work, but you are planning the work. So it could be a strategy session or work plan where you're modifying your next steps and coming up with what's the go forward work. And then lastly is connect. And this is where the focus of the meeting is really about building relationships, getting to know each other. Sales meetings could fall into this bucket, or other kinds of relationship or team building meetings where you're coming together, and one of the core reasons is that you want to have a strong relationship and know each other better. So these are the 6 reasons why you might have a meeting. And sometimes you might find when you're thinking about your meeting that you have more than one of these buckets is for what the meeting's about. And that's okay. Excuse me. Just pick the one that is the most important, or you can write a combination sentence that kind of touches on both of them. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a couple of minutes. If you have a long meeting, if you're planning a day-long retreat or a multi-hour meeting, you might find that it's a little bit easier to break that meeting up into multiple sessions and set a desired outcome for each of those sessions. So pick the bucket that most is the highest level for each of those meetings and allow that to be its own kind of mini meeting that you're stacking back to back. Again, we're going to talk more about desired outcomes in a minute, but just keep these different buckets in mind when you're going through that. So now you know what it is that you want to accomplish in a broad sense, kind of why you're gathering people together. But you need to check in with yourself and say, do I really need a meeting? Is that really the right next step? And the reason we say that is because a meeting is not the right answer for every situation. It really should be the last resort, because getting 10 minutes of time from people individually is very easy. Getting 10 minutes of time from a group of people collectively in the same 10 minutes all together is very, very hard. So if there are other ways that you can achieve what you need without having a meeting, you should absolutely do that. So let's walk through a couple of those alternatives. And of course, they depend on the complexity of the information you need and what it is you have to accomplish and the time sensitivity. So sometimes a meeting is absolutely the right thing. Let's just check in on some other options though. So first, can you send an email or write a memo or draft a PowerPoint or something to share information so you don't need to bring people together real time? Can this information be shared out in a written format or some other kind of visual format? And this works when people don't need to be in conversation with each other. So you can share the information out, and then people individually can respond to you. And that's fine. They don't need to actually be responding to each other in that kind of situation. You can just be gathering any questions or comments or feedback for yourself. So that's the first one. Send an email instead. Second, can you use some kind of shared document, whether you can use Google Docs or a Word document using track changes, where people can be contributing their thoughts and questions and ideas in the material, where everyone can see it. But again, they're not in conversation real time. They're just giving input on something. So there are lots of different tools you can use. I mentioned 2 already with Word and Google Docs. There are also tools for visual feedback. So if you have an image that you need feedback on mock-up or something like that, there are other tools. So it doesn't just have to be for text-based communication. But the key is people can share their comments. Everyone can see it, but they're not necessarily talking to each other in real time. And then thirdly, can you use a chat app? So we use Slack in our team, and people can ask a question, they can put up some materials, they can ask for feedback, and we can talk kind of at our own pace. So over the course of an hour or a day, people can weigh in, you can have a dialogue back and forth, and come to some resolution. And we even do voting through Slack as well. So someone will say, okay, here's my synthesis of the decision, and we use different emojis, so vote yes with a thumbs up, vote no with a sad face, or whatever it is. And so you ultimately can achieve the same kind of conversation, but it doesn't happen kind of in a single moment. It happens kind of over a period of time, but people still have a chance to weigh in. So let's assume now that you looked at all of these options and you said, nope, I really do need people to come together in a meeting, which is totally appropriate. Then now you have to build your agenda. Now, an effective agenda is more than just a calendar invitation. Unfortunately, Google and Outlook, they've kind of made us think that if you send a calendar invitation, you've done your job. But that's not exactly, the best way to move forward with a meeting. So when you're planning a meeting, you really want to think about what is it that you're going to achieve? What is that outcome that this meeting will accomplish? Then what are you going to do? And we'll talk about how to lay that out in detail so that it can be your roadmap. And thirdly, how should people prepare so that everybody walks into the room ready for the conversation. Because most oftentimes the meeting leader has done some decent thinking about the meeting, but the meeting participants have very little idea of what's going to happen in this meeting or what they should do to prepare and be ready for that conversation. And there's a disconnect between the meeting leader and the meeting participants, which is how you end up in meetings where you're saying, why am I at this meeting? And it's because the meeting leader didn't do a good job of communicating to you what that meeting was about, so you could make a decision as a participant as to whether it was a good use of your time. So let's look at each of these individually. First up is a desired outcome. So this is a clear statement of what you're going to walk out of the meeting having completed or achieved. Now, what's important about this statement is that it should fall under the bucket that you started with when you said, this is going to be a decision-making meeting or this is going to be a planning meeting. That's where you start from. And then you write the statement that's very specific. So let's look at some examples. If we have a decision-making meeting, we might write something like this. The budget is approved for next quarter based on last quarter's performance. Very specific. At the end of the day, we will have an approved budget, and it's going to be based on last quarter. Really different than, let's have a meeting to discuss last quarter's financial results. The piece around discussing last quarter's results is that if you say, let's have a discussion, at the end, you can kind of walk out the door and say, was that a good discussion? What did it lead to? So you want to be clear and be able to ask yourself, if we achieve this result, if the budget's approved, will that be good? Like, will I feel like I have what I need to go forward? And if the answer is yes, then great, you've written a good desired outcome. And if the answer is I'm not sure, then you're probably not clear enough on your desired outcome. Let's look at one more. For an alignment and planning meeting, this one has a kind of combo bucket. We've written a statement that says, we're going to have shared understanding of progress, feedback, and next steps. So this might be in the case where you're working with a client and you're going to do a check-in on the project. Now, instead of just saying, like we have in our not that section, to do a check-in with the client on work progress, which is very ambiguous. So at the end of that conversation, if you've done a check-in, kind of, so what? Well, if we have shared understanding of where we are in the process, we have the client's feedback, and we both agree and understand on the next steps, then I know exactly what this meeting achieved, and I am ready to move forward with that project and that client. So one thing to note here is the sentences on the right in the not that section begin with to something, to discuss, to check in. That's the activity that you're going to do in the conversation. When you write a desired outcome, you want to avoid writing it in a to statement. You want to instead focus on trying to write it with a noun. Kind of what's the outcome? It's the approved budget. It's shared understanding. It's a list of next steps. Whatever that kind of specific result is, and try to avoid writing to verb statements. So you've written your desired outcome. You know what you're going to achieve in this meeting. Now you have to write out your agenda, which is how you're going to get to that outcome. The more detail that you put here, the better. This is your roadmap, and it is going to guide your conversation, and it's going to guide you as you're facilitating the conversation. So the more vague this is, the harder it is for you to keep yourself on track and keep the conversation on track, and the harder it is for other people to help also keep the conversation on track. All too often, we end up spending too much time on the first agenda topic and then running out of time for the rest of the meeting. And then we have to say, oh, well, now we have to have another meeting to get through the rest of the agenda because we didn't get through everything. That happens for a lot of reasons. It happens because people try and jam-pack too many things into a single agenda, into a single meeting. It happens because people don't allocate time and think about how long should we be spending on each of these, and am I managing the conversation to only spend that much time? And it's kind of a silly thing, but if you allocate 15 minutes for something, it will take 15 minutes. If you allocate 10, many times you can achieve the same value of the conversation in 10 minutes. So if you're intentional, you can actually use less time excuse me, and achieve the same results. So you really want to plan your agenda in detail. So let's take a look at what that looks like. On the left, we have writing an agenda item like reflections and questions on the pre-reading material, 10 minutes. So I've identified exactly what I want people to do. I want them to share their reflections and ask questions on our pre-reading material, and I'm going to allocate 10 minutes to that. What I don't want to put is discuss the pre-reading. And the reason I don't want to put that is because it's really vague. And I've sat in other meetings where people have started by saying, okay, so let's discuss the materials that I sent out ahead of time. And then it's like silence because people don't know what they're supposed to be sharing. Discuss doesn't give you enough information. Even something like, so what did you guys think of the pre-reading? Or so what do you think of this material? It's hard to get the conversation going. So you want to be really specific so people are ready to share. And again, by allocating 10 minutes, people are more likely to keep their comments brief because they know we only have 10 minutes for this. We could take the whole time, but we only have 10 minutes. So people can be a little bit more brief, and you can ask them, and you can even say, like, we only have 10 minutes for this topic, so please share the most burning issues, and let's try and keep this quick. Let's take another example. So this would be for a brainstorming conversation. So we could say, brainstorm ways to promote our webinar. And that whole thing is going to take 20 minutes. And then we even write more detail. We're going to have 3 minutes for each person to write individually. Then we'll take 2 minutes and we'll go round robin, and each person will share what they wrote down. And then we'll have 7 minutes for enhancing those ideas as a group. So when I add this up, I say for a meeting of 5 people, we have 3 minutes to write, 2 minutes apiece to share, but 5 of us, so that's 10 minutes, and then 7 minutes to enhance. So we're at a total of 20. Now, if I hadn't written out all that detail, it might easily have just been, oh, that's going to take us about 10 minutes to do the brainstorm, and not realize that actually this is going to take twice as long as I expected. And when I put something just in the not that section here, this brainstorm how to promote the webinar, and I leave it like that, again, what does the activity look like for that? A brainstorming can happen in lots of different ways. So the more clear that I am about the process, the better time allocation I have, and the better my participants can work in that moment. So the last piece of our agenda is around pre-work. So everyone, you want everyone to come into the meeting being as prepared as possible. Because again, like I mentioned before, getting 10 minutes of time from anyone individually is pretty easy. But getting that same 10 minutes of time from people as a group in real time is very, very hard. So you want to minimize the amount of time that you have to spend in the meeting presenting material one way, and maximize the amount of time you're in conversation or in dialogue with each other. Additionally, there's research that shows that most people have their best thinking on a topic 24 to 48 hours after they've consumed the information. So if you're presenting information real time and asking people to give you immediate feedback or immediately jump in, you're probably not getting their best thinking. But if you present it to them a day or two before and let them sleep on it, digest it, consume it at the right moment for them, then when they come into the meeting, you're getting the kind of higher level, deeper value from that person. Now, it's important not to overload people, but you do want to give them, kind of whatever it is that you can that will get them ready to come into that conversation. So let's take a look. So again, detail is really important here. So in our this column, review attached file and come prepared to answer these questions. What surprised you? What concerns you? And what is missing? And we tell them in the beginning, it's approximately 10 minutes of work. Now, if we just say something like see attached file or review attached file, it's much harder to know, one, how long do I need to allocate for this? Two, what am I supposed to be looking for when I'm looking it over? And 3, what am I going to do with this information afterwards? So when you give people clear instructions and you tell them, just take 10 minutes, don't take a half an hour, or take more than 2, because if you just skim it, that's not enough. So give people what they need to do so that they can come in and ready. Because now when you ask them for reflections on the pre-reading, you can actually say, So what surprised you or what was missing? And people will be ready to answer and jump right into that conversation. So you've done all this great work for planning. You've shared out this thoughtful, robust agenda. People have done their pre-work. A couple of notes on that. You can send a reminder to do pre-work. That's definitely a helpful thing to do the day before or the day of the meeting. Just send an email with a note. Just want to remind everybody this meeting is coming. Here's the pre-work. If there's materials, attach them so they're easy reference again, and people can do that. And if you need to influence people to do pre-work, for example, people who are in different departments who don't report to you, or maybe a senior person who will be attending the meeting, one thing we've heard is helpful from some of our clients is that you could schedule 10 minutes the day before the meeting or the morning before the meeting with that particular person to just go over the pre-work with them, either just share verbally the key highlights or do a little presentation check-in with them and say, I just want to make sure before we go into that meeting that you're aware of X, Y, and Z. So instead of them reading the materials by themselves, which they may not be accustomed to doing, you've just done it in a 10-minute little mini meeting with them instead of them doing it by themselves. That way you ensure that this person comes prepared. And that's especially helpful, again, if it's a key decision maker, where if they're not prepared for that meeting, it's going to really throw your whole meeting off. All right, so now everybody's coming in prepared and we are ready and it's time for our actual meeting. Now, I just want to note that there are times where you may have an impromptu conversation that doesn't have a full agenda. You know, one of those moments where you just gather people together for an emergent conversation, or maybe you're chatting through Slack or HipChat or Yammer, and you realize, oh, this has gotten a little out of hand, and I think we actually need to come together for a quick conversation. I'm just going to pick up the phone or hop on Skype and, grab those 3 people for a 5-minute conversation. So even in those cases, you want to start by saying, this is what I need out of this conversation. We need to make a decision on X. Start with that desired outcome so that you can then manage the conversation to achieve that outcome. So now, okay, let's talk about what it means to manage your conversation. Well, we're going to start by clarifying again, why are you in this meeting? We're then going to follow the agenda that we so thoughtfully built. We'll use a back burner to keep the conversation on topic, and then we're going to end with a wrap-up. We'll talk about each of these individually. So starting with the agenda. The agenda is your best friend. And number one, have it in front of you. You just put all this great work into building your agenda. Make sure you have a copy in front of you, whether that's a printout or if it's on a screen, projected, if you write it up on the wall. Doesn't matter. Just make sure that you can see your agenda throughout the meeting. And even better, make it visible to everybody. That way everyone can kind of help facilitate the conversation. Next, get people aligned on what this meeting is about. I don't know about you, but there are times in my day where I'm back-to-back meetings, and sometimes I walk into the room and I'm not even sure what conversation I'm about to have, because all I know is my calendar just pinged me and told me to be somewhere, and so I'm there. You want to make sure people are, like, their head is in the right space and they are ready for this conversation. So starting by saying, welcome everybody. This is what we are going to do in this meeting. This is what we are going to accomplish. Will help make sure that everybody is ready and on track and on the same page about what this conversation is about. And it will help them kind of put aside whatever else is on their mind, whether it's work back at their desk or another meeting that they were just running from. Next up is to follow the agenda topics and your time allocation. So this is your roadmap. So really try and stick to it. Use it as a reference. One trick is that I often will write, instead of just 10 minutes or 5 minutes for each agenda item, I'll write on my copy the actual times it's going to be. So if our meeting starts at 1, I'll say from 1 to 1:10 is our reflections on pre-reading. And then from 1:10 to 1:15 is the decision making, or whatever it is. So that when I'm looking at my watch, I can see, oh, it's 1:12. Are we still on track in that time? And I don't have to do the math in my head and say, how many minutes are we supposed to be at this moment? You can also set a timer. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually extremely helpful to not have to be worrying about managing the conversation, staying on topic, contributing yourself to the conversation, and then also checking the time. So set a timer, and oftentimes it's even helpful if you have 10 minutes allocated, set the timer for 8 minutes so that you can check in and say, okay, we only have 2 minutes left for this topic. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what you can do if you're running out of time. Let's actually talk about that right now. So you might find that you've allocated 10 minutes and your 10 minutes is coming to a close and you're like, what do we do? Because I'm not sure that we've achieved what we needed to in this segment. So there are a couple things you can do to help the group move forward. So one is you could say something like, I see we're coming to the end of our allotted time. Is anyone burning to add anything new to this topic? And that's good when this topic doesn't really need to achieve anything in particular. So example, for the reflections on a budget or a pre-reading or kind of brainstorming, things like that, where it might not really be valuable for you to extend by 5 or 10 more minutes. So you can just ask the group, is there anything new that anyone wants to share? Anything that hasn't been said yet that we want to make sure gets said? And then move the conversation forward. Another option is you could say, I think we're ready for making a decision, or I'm not sure if we're ready to make a decision. So if we're not, what more do we need? So it might be that we're having a really interesting conversation about this decision, but we actually can't make the decision as this group. Maybe we're missing some key information. Maybe we're missing one of the decision makers, and we didn't realize it when we started. But we've had this conversation that's circling around, and we might find that, again, extending for a couple more minutes isn't actually going to help us to get to that decision. It's just going to be circling around further. So ask the team, ask the group together, are we ready for a decision? And if not, what else do we need in order to make that decision? Another thing you could do is put it to the group to say, do you want to extend our time? So you could say, feels like there's a lot of energy on this topic. We could extend our time now and continue this if the group feels it would be worthwhile. What do you all think? And let the group decide to intentionally move off the agenda, the planned agenda. That's totally fine. You can figure out where you're going to pick up that time later. Maybe you do need to ultimately have another meeting to finish up, but the group is doing it intentionally, and it's not just because the meeting conversation kind of wandered out of control. Lastly, you can do a little reflection. You could say, here's what I've heard so far, and then give your analysis. Does this feel right? And if yes, are we ready to move on? So sometimes we call it violent agreement, where people are talking and talking and talking, but you're actually all saying the same thing, and you're just really agreeing with each other and very enthused. And you just need to take a step back and have someone kind of ask the group, this is what I've heard. Does everyone agree? And if yes, let's keep going. We don't need to kind of continue to beat this horse. Now, a couple other things that you can do if you find that time is a challenge is there are some facilitation techniques and norms. We're not going to talk about that in this particular webinar, but please follow up with us afterwards. We have lots of articles on our blog about using norms to manage the conversation, to help people who may be a little bit more long-winded, to be a little bit quieter, to help people who are quiet and don't often speak up, to speak up more into the meeting. There's a number of techniques, things you can do. I'll share just 2 of them right now, but there's a whole bunch that we could talk about. We'll probably do another webinar on using norms and facilitating effective conversation. But just 2 to mention right now. One is that if you have quiet people in the meeting, one thing you could do is before the meeting, just do a little check-in with them, even through an email or running into them in the hallway, and just say, hey, I'm really excited that you're going to be participating in this meeting. I'm really looking forward to what you have to say. So I hope you'll come in and share, and I hope you won't mind if I call on you at some points in the meeting if you haven't spoken up, because I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So give them a little heads up that you want them to speak, so that they'll be prepared. And then in the meeting, if they're really quiet, you can say, at some point in the conversation, there are a few people we haven't heard from yet. Mary, I'm really interested to know, what are you thinking about this? So she's had a heads up that you're going to call on her, and it's not just out of the blue, which can be a little bit intimidating when you get called on when you're not ready. So she's had a good heads up, and now you're giving her some space. Another thing you can do is have norms or guidelines for how you're going to manage the conversation and what people should expect to behave. And one of your norms could be kind of step back or step forward. So if you're a person who talks a lot, step back from the conversation to make a room for others. And again, if you're kind of person who's generally quieter, step forward and share your voice. And so if you notice that someone is kind of going on, you could say things like, I want to call upon our norm and make sure that we are stepping back and making space for other voices. So maybe let's give some other people a chance and kind of encourage people to be quiet. And then the last thing is that if you've made those time allocations visible to everyone, if everybody knows you only have 10 minutes, that's often a good cue for people to not speak so long and to be a little bit more short and precise with their comments. And you can also, again, point to that time and say, Bill, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we only have 7 minutes for this topic, so I just want to make sure that other people have a chance to speak. So it helps you, it's a good cue for others, and it helps you to facilitate the conversation given your time constraints. Okay, moving along. The back burner. So it is inevitable that the conversation will wander off topic, go on a tangent, maybe get really deep in the weeds where it's really not helping you achieve your outcome anymore because you're kind of off on some other side. So that's what a back burner is for. It's a place to hold ideas for later, and it helps you keep the conversation on topic to achieve your outcome for that particular meeting. So when the conversation goes off, you can use the back burner to save ideas for later. And what this does, it helps people feel heard and acknowledged because you're not just cutting off the conversation and saying, that's not relevant, stick to the topics. What you're actually doing is saying, this is a really important topic or a really important conversation that we're having. It's just not for this meeting. So let's acknowledge that it's important. Let's write it down in our back burner and save it for the right people at the right time. And one way to make people feel heard and acknowledged is to have a visible back burner. That could be a flip chart on the wall or a whiteboard. It could be your shared screen, whatever you're sharing on the screen, to have a document or a column for back burner items. But write it in there so people see, here's the back burner and my topic is on the back burner. And again, this is great because there might be a conversation that's really deep into details where it's relevant, but it's just for only 2 people in the meeting or 3 people in the meeting, not the whole group. So say, great, let's put it here and you guys can take that offline for later. And when you put these items in the back burner, be sure to give each one an owner. So someone is responsible for making sure that that conversation happens with the right people at the right time. This also again helps people feel heard and acknowledged because they see that this topic has either been assigned to them, and so they're going to take it offline and go follow up on it, or someone else in the conversation is going to be responsible, and it's not just going to end up in the meeting notes and disappear forever. Now, the great thing about a back burner is that anyone in the meeting can help recognize when the conversation has gone off track and added something to the back burner. It doesn't just have to be you as the meeting leader. You can have a norm with the group where you say, we're going to use a back burner to help ourselves stay on topic. So if anybody notices that the conversation is going off track, it's your responsibility, it's our collective responsibility to say, time out, I think this topic should go in the back burner. And you don't have to now just be the only one trying to manage to the agenda. You've now empowered everyone in the group to help contribute to the back burner. And you might even find, I see this happen in some of the meetings that I attend, where someone says, I have a topic for the back burner. I don't want to bring it up now because I recognize that it's off topic, but I don't want to forget about it either. So I just want to add this to the back burner. So now you've avoided even going off track because that person has now internalized this idea that I don't have to share this information in the meeting. I can just add to the back burner, and I know the group will then hear it and it will be ready for later. So lastly, we have the meeting wrap-up. So you've made it through the entire conversation, and now it's time to put that fine point on exactly what you've discussed and what you've achieved. So we recommend that you reserve the last 5 minutes of your meeting for the wrap-up, where you're clarifying decisions and next steps, and capturing those meeting outcomes. So if someone was taking notes, that's great. They don't have to be, but if someone was taking notes, you can start by having that person do a little recap or sharing out. This is what I wrote down for our decisions. This is what I wrote down for the key next steps. If nobody was taking notes, which is also totally fine, you don't need to take notes during every conversation. It's especially hard when you're trying to facilitate the meeting and take notes at the same time yourself and contribute to the conversation. It's a lot of work to do. So totally fine to not take any notes during the meeting and instead build the notes together during this 5-minute wrap-up. So for example, you could say, okay, let's close up our meeting. We have a couple minutes left. What are the decisions? Who can share out with me what they thought the decision was that we made earlier? And you write it in the moment, in real time, you capture that decision. Same thing with, all right, so what are our next steps? And you write them down in real time. And what you're doing is now building a record of the meeting's outcomes so that everybody agrees to what the outcomes are, but just as importantly, you've now created a sense of accomplishment and closure for this meeting. Everybody can clearly see this is what we achieved, and I can walk out of this room knowing I'm on the same page and feeling like it was a good use of my time. You can even ask the question or share back on the screen, this was our desired outcome. Did we achieve it? And oftentimes, if you follow the practices that I've outlined, you'll have a resounding yes. Yes, we achieved that. We made our decision. We have our next steps. We have our list of ideas, whatever it is. And people feel really good that this meeting was a very good use of their time. So a couple of nuanced points I want to mention. When you're writing down your next steps, be sure to include an owner. The notorious we are going to do this, or let's be sure to follow up on that. Those are not well-written next steps that are going to move you forward. So you need to make sure that just like with a back burner, having an owner to those items, that all of your next steps have an owner. And if the person who's ultimately responsible for that next step isn't in this meeting, make sure that there's someone in the meeting who's responsible for making sure that that person's informed. And this happens if somebody misses a meeting because they're sick or on vacation, or also you just might find that there's a next step that someone in a different department has to do, and they didn't need to be in this meeting, but they do need to follow up on some item, and so you want to make sure that somebody in the meeting knows to inform them and make sure that that next step happens. If possible, also add a due date to those next steps. That helps people prioritize where this next action item goes in their overall priorities and to-do list. Sometimes it's hard when you have all different kinds of competing priorities or projects and you're working on different things to know how important is this next step given all my other work. So you've finished your meeting. We're basically coming to the end of our webinar here, at least the content part. So as a quick summary, you always want to start with, do I really need a meeting? Can I use a different form of communication or collaboration to achieve that same outcome? And if I do need a meeting, make sure you plan that clear and thoughtful agenda. What bucket is this meeting really about? What's that very specific desired outcome? Make sure you have your robust agenda items and pre-work. And then during the meeting, follow those best practices. Use your agenda. You put all that great time into building it, so you might as well use it. Use a back burner to keep the conversation on track and put off-topic items to the side. And then end with a wrap-up so that everybody knows exactly what you accomplished and they feel really good about the meeting conversation. And now going back to the office, you're thinking, okay, I just heard a ton of information, and we're going to make sure that you have all of this in your email. You can see the slides and the recording and all those other things, and you can always follow up with us. Please get in contact if you want to talk through any of this. We always love talking to people and helping them have productive meetings and bringing good meeting practices. And I should also say that we do webinars and workshops and speaking inside of organizations as well. So if you think this is something that your entire organization needs to work on, we'd be happy to talk with you about how to come and work with your organization. But for today, you're going back to your office now, and you want to start to implement some of these things. So this is what we recommend. Number one, don't try everything at once. especially because there's a lot of different pieces here and it can feel like a lot of work to try and do them all. So just pick one or two things that you think will either be the easiest for you or will make the most difference in your meetings. And just start with those. Try them for a few weeks. Create some small wins, get other people excited, impress them with your meetings. And sometimes just having a desired outcome makes all the difference. Or doing that wrap up, people will be so impressed with you as a meeting leader. Or if you're a participant, at the end of the meeting say, hey, can we just clarify what are those, what was the decision that was made in this meeting? Suddenly you become like a meeting hero because you've suddenly changed that whole meeting from being interesting or good conversation into a very clear outcome. So just find the one or two things that you think are going to make a difference and start with those. Another thing is to share this with your colleagues, right? Share this webinar, send them some of our blog articles, tell them about what you learned, get other people on board, and specifically find an accountability partner, right? If someone else is expecting you to behave in a certain way, whether that be sending an agenda or doing that wrap up or using a back burner, it's helpful when there's more than one person. And so find someone who will be your partner in this, who can support you and who will also hold you up to those standards that you guys have set for yourselves. Now, if you're not exactly sure which things you want to try, I already mentioned, just try setting a desired outcome. Go through your calendar for the next week or two and see what meetings have you planned, and can you write a desired outcome just for those meetings. Alternatively, end your meetings with a wrap up. That's another easy way, and you can also ask to do that even if you're not the meeting planner. And then another one might be the back burner, right? Just offer it up to the team and say, hey guys, I'd like to try something new in our meeting today. I want to do this thing called a back burner, and this is what it is. Can we all try and recognize when we need to put something in the back burner? Those are a couple of easy ones that you can try out. So a couple other things as we wrap up here. You can learn more on our website. You can learn more about our services, the Meeteor software, which you should also stick around for because I'm about to show a little demo and how all of these practices that we just talked about are embedded in our software to help make it easier for you to follow them. And of course, we have a weekly blog where we write about team best practices, meetings, and collaboration. And all of that is also on our website, and you can subscribe there as well. So I'm going to switch over now and go to our software. So this is the Meeteor software, and we're actually about to have a new visual design, so I apologize if this looks a little bit different than what you might be seeing when you watch this webinar, but the functionality is all the same, so just hang in there with us. So the most important thing to understand is that the way that we structure our meetings is that everything belongs in a workspace. It's like a folder that contains all of your meetings and related content. And each workspace is its own individual set of meetings and content. So we're going to go here into this marketing department. And once I'm inside this workspace, I can see that there are a number of different tabs here on the left. So there's meetings, tasks, decisions, learnings, etc. And here on the meetings page, I can see that these are the meetings that are upcoming and these are the past meetings. And these are only for the marketing department. A different workspace will have a different set of meetings, different set of tasks, etc. So let's go in here and create a new meeting. And we'll call this one our social media and analytics review. So that's our meeting name. I'm using a little spell checker here. And now I'm going to go in and plan the agenda. So the first part of the agenda is the same thing as a calendar invitation. So your meeting name, the date and time, where the meeting is going to happen, or the logistics information for a call-in, and who's going to participate. So I'm not going to go through all of those pieces and how they work. But the meeting content, this is where the agenda planning comes in. The first thing listed here is the desired outcome. Why are we having this meeting? So instead of just having one big descriptor box, which often is what happens in the calendar invite, or a blank email where you're now going to send out the agenda, we're actually giving you some structure that's based on the best practices. So starting with, what is the desired outcome? This will be to gain shared alignment on the results and determine which campaigns to continue. So that's what our meeting is all about. And I'm not actually worried about the spell checker right now. And now I'm going to build out my agenda. So I can list out here topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. And now maybe I decide that I have some sub things on here. So we're going to ask kind of question 1, question 2. These are all things that we're going to be discussing. And I can use my formatting and make those bullet points. And I'm going to follow my practices. And I'm going to say Mamie is going to lead this section, and she's going to have 10 minutes to do that. I'll take this, and I'm going to make that italics. Then I'll take this topic, and I'll make this bold. So you can do a bunch of different things to really build out that robust agenda that we were just talking about earlier. Next, I have my section on pre-work. So here's where I can give those instructions and say it's for 10 minutes it should take them, and I can attach a document. So you can see here I'll name my document pre-reading, and I can paste the link, so a Google Doc or a Dropbox document link, or you can browse from your computer. And when you add this, this document's now attached, and it will come through in the invitation that you send, so people will get it by email along with the instructions. If you have any meeting materials, you can also attach them here in this meeting document section. And this is for either materials you're going to be presenting, or it could be after the meeting. If you've written on the whiteboard or flip charts and you want to take pictures of those so you don't lose them, you could then attach them here after the meeting so that those images are always associated with this particular meeting. And then the last piece here has some additional details. So I mentioned briefly this idea of norms, that you might have some ground rules for your conversation. So this is where you can add your norms or your ground rules. And if you need a little help, this little icon here, this help icon, opens up a panel where we have dozens and dozens of norms for you to choose from, or at least to get you started. So I like this one here. Capture off-topic items in a back burner and agree to discuss them at a more appropriate time. So I'm going to put that in here, get rid of my little help window. And now in my agenda, people will see we're going to be using a back burner. So it just helps people remember how we're going to act. And then, of course, I can select some different roles if someone else is going to be helping me keep the meeting on track or someone else is going to be taking notes. I can send my invitation from here as well. So I'll just show you what that looks like. You get a quick review. You can send your personal message and then send the meeting invitation. And everyone will get this by email. It comes with a calendar invite. They can add it to their calendar really easily. And they'll have the agenda, the pre-work, all of that stuff. So you did this great planning. Now you've had your meeting. You've used your agenda. And you want to take some notes. So during your wrap-up, you can now build out your notes effectively. So there are 4 kinds of notes within Meeteor. The first is just a general note, and we say that this is for context. This is any information that you're capturing that's really not it's maybe not so important, but it maybe helps give context to information. If you're doing a wrap-up at the end, you're probably not writing these kinds of notes. This is more for people who are taking notes during the meeting and they're not yet exactly sure which information is important. They're just trying to capture the information as you go. The second kind of note is a task. So these are for any next steps. They're also for back burner items in our system. So we'll call this one an off-agenda topic. And I can assign it an owner. I can give it a due date, and I can put it in a task group. And one of the task group options is a back burner. So now it's in our meeting notes that this is a topic that we're going to deal with later. Mamie's going to be responsible for it, and it's in the back burner. A different type of task, or this, you use the same key to mark a task, but this is for an actual next step. So we'll call this one next step. And the same thing here. I can assign it to an owner from the team. I can give it a due date. And here I'm going to put it on the proper place within our work plan. So I'm going to put this one in our social media and online community work group, task group. The next kind of note is a decision. And if I realize, actually, this one's not a decision, I'm going to just make it back to a note. I can do that. I can easily switch between any of the note types, and the content all saves. So I don't need to worry about if we change something and it's no longer a decision, we change our mind, totally fine. You can change your note type. This is where your decisions go. And you can see there's a little rationale box over here. And this rationale box is for the kind of core reason why you made this decision. And you might find that when you're sharing out a decision afterwards, people are kind of like, well, why did you make that decision? Or sometimes it's hard to apply a decision to your work if you don't actually understand why the decision was made. So just capture in a one sentence or a bullet point or something why this was the right decision. And then the last kind of note is a learning. And learnings are of any type of critical information, big ideas, important stuff that you want to draw people's attention to. So if you don't have learnings in your meetings, that's fine. If you're like, I don't really get how I would use this learning thing, totally fine. Don't use it. It's there for when you need it. When you say, we maybe have a lot of notes, and this is like really important information. It's an insight. It's key customer information. Something that we just don't want to forget and we want to hold on to, make that one a learning. So once you've built up your notes in here, so you've done your wrap-up, you've captured your 2 tasks, your decision, whatever it is, you can send a summary from right here, and everyone in the meeting will get a summary so that they all have these notes clearly organized, coming right into their inbox, and you don't have to worry about people not knowing what the meeting accomplished because you've built this great outcomes, you know exactly what you did, and everyone's got it in their inbox. There's a bunch of other functionality in our system. So for example, the tasks that you create in your meeting automatically show up here on your team task plan. So here's the next step that we created. And if I go down into our back burner, here's that off agenda topic that we just wrote. Decisions all got aggregated on the decisions page. So it doesn't matter what meeting they came from. They're in terms of the marketing department. If the marketing department had a meeting in Meeteor and there was a decision made, it's on this page. So you can now see exactly what the decision history is. You don't have to remember which meeting it was. You're like, I thought we already made a decision about this. You're like, but I don't remember when it was. You just go to the decisions page and you can scroll through and you can find any decision you're looking for. Same thing with learnings. So I'm going to wrap us up for today. Again, if you have any questions about our software, our services, or want to bring us into your organization, please be in touch. Please share this webinar with your colleagues and your friends. We really want more people to have productive meetings and get more done in their workdays. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hosting you on a future webinar.